I was first inspired to make this video after seeing how abysmal Avowed was and seeing the comparison video to Oblivion. You know, I've often heard people say that Oblivion has aged badly, and I've never liked it when people say that, but I could never quite figure out why I disagreed with them, even though so many people say it. Even people who really like Oblivion, you'll hear them say that they think it's aged badly. And I've always assumed that I didn't like it because I was just nostalgic, and that was influencing me to think that it was better than it actually was, even though it has aged badly. And I definitely do have a bias towards this game. It was a huge part of my childhood. However, I now know that I was right all along. Oblivion has aged very well. I just couldn't figure out how to word it until now, and it was seeing the comparison to Avowed that really showed me this. When people say Oblivion has aged badly, they're talking about things that are just superficial. On the surface, you absolutely can say it has aged badly, and there are elements of it that it's true, it has aged badly. But if you scratch underneath the surface, you can see Oblivion has actually aged very well. I would like to start off with talking about some of the elements of the game that, to be fair, have aged badly, and talk about some of the other elements of Oblivion that I personally don't like, so that this isn't just a video of me glazing Oblivion the entire time. I understand that it isn't a perfect game, and the main thing that everybody will point to are the potato-faced inhabitants of Oblivion. Yeah, they look a little goofy. I'll go into why I don't think that really matters for the spirit of the game, or to me personally later in the video, but for now I can say, yeah, they don't look the best. We also have the clunky dialogue to go along with those faces, and my personal biggest problems with Oblivion that I think matter more than these because they affect the actual spirit of the game is the poor dungeon design and the terrible mechanics with regards to leveling up. I'll go through these backwards and explain a bit about them, starting with character progression. So here you can see a description of how leveling works in Oblivion from the Elder Scrolls pages, complete with a section that is literally named the leveling problem. The fact that monsters and other enemies level up at the same time as your character leads to the leveling problem. If you make poor choices in leveling up, your character will become relatively weaker than the monsters as your level progresses. Now, you might think to yourself, well that's fair, if you make a mistake, your character sucks ass, what's wrong with that? The shortest version of how this works is that you have skills and attributes. Your skills go up, which then allows you to improve attributes when you have a level up. You can improve them to a maximum of 5 per level, each 2 skills is 1 increase, so you have to get 10 skills for a 5 increase. You can only pick 3, except luck, which only increases by 1 at a time. I won't go into details on the most efficient way to level in Oblivion, because it will literally take a full video. But basically the problem is you need to keep a close track of how those skills are going to affect those attributes when you level up. But the game won't do it for you. Nowadays you can get mods that do it for you, but in the vanilla game you have to manually keep track of them. So as a kid when I played this, I'd have to have a notepad next to me and keep a tally of each level that I got, each skill up that I got, each level, and measure how it would affect my attributes, increasing it by 1 each time one of them affected it by 2. So you get like 1 in hand-to-hand, 1 in blade, and that means your strength will be able to go up by 1 when you level up. Unnecessarily overcomplicated and has a genuinely bad impact on the game if you keep going. If you want to play at higher levels, if you want to play at higher difficulty, you need to make sure your levels are efficient. You have to have efficient leveling, or eventually the game just becomes impossible and you have to set it to the lowest difficulty. A lot of the times when people do challenge runs of Oblivion, they'll actually just stay at level 1 because the game ends up being easier by not leveling up. Ridiculous. There are other elements of the character progression that are goofy, but I'll leave it there for now, you get the point. If you really want to go and read all of this, then go for it. The next problem is the dungeon design. Not as much to say about this because it is just bad. They don't seem too bad when you first start playing, they seem fine. The Oblivion gates in particular seem awesome, but then you realise as you play it more that it's just a whole bunch of copy and paste. The cave and the forts are really dull. They have loads of preset cells that were just used over and over. They have no fast exits at the end, most of them. Some of them do, but like in Skyrim where you always have a quick exit at the end, in Oblivion you just have to walk the whole way back through the empty cave, and the enemy placement is bad. There's one clip from the making of where a guy is just joking around how he randomly places zombies all over the caves with no reasoning, and it really shows when you play it.
I love the undead. I try to use them as much as possible. Just bring in one of these guys, pop them down, and so like this one only has 1 arm, or the other one has no head. I guess I'm sort of a non-conventional sort of person.
Moving on, we go to the dialogue, both in terms of writing and delivery. There's so much voice acting in Oblivion that it's not too much of a surprise that there's a mixed bag of good and bad voice acting. Wes Johnson, as always, kills every voice he provides, the Oblivion guards being one of the most iconic voices in video games ever.
Stop right there, criminal scum. Nobody breaks the law on my watch. I'm confiscating your stolen goods. Now pay your fine, or it's off to jail.
But there is a lot of bad writing and bad delivery in the game as well, and a lot of actual just mistakes that were straight up left in the game.
Thieves broke into the Arcane University, the Imperial Legion compound, and the temple all on the same night. Wait a minute, let me do that one again. I heard the thieves broke into the Arcane University.
And lastly, and the main thing that you will see people talking about and pointing out with Oblivion are the faces of the people, like I mentioned earlier, which some of them are definitely a little odd. But it's from this point that I want to jump into talking about how Oblivion, despite all of these things, has actually aged well in terms of the important parts of the game, and the things that make it great at the time still are just as great today, if not even better by the comparison of modern video games. And just to put the whole faces being ugly into perspective, I can show you some faces from other games from 2006, like Bully, Dead Rising, and Gears of War. But what a great year for games 2006 was, by the way. Holy shit, look at all these fucking bangers that were released. But regardless, the thing with these faces is that they're not the reason Oblivion was great. Even though, at the time, you know, it was cool that the game had fairly good graphics by the standards of the other games coming out, and they had all the different facial expressions that could be shown. Bethesda was using it as a point to sell the game, and it certainly was interesting, and it definitely helps add immersion into the game, especially considering a lot of other games back then, certainly before 2006, these large RPG games would have just characters that are just blank, staring at you with no expression the whole time. Normally they wouldn't even have voice acting, never mind bad voice acting, it would just be text. The main component in regards to specifically the way Oblivion looks that you can still be impressed with now, though, are these sprawling views that you can see as you explore the world. The countryside in the game looks amazing, the scenic overlooks are great, and being able to see the Imperial City Tower from so far away is amazing, and the views in a lot of other open world games that have been released since still aren't as good as this, even Skyrim in my opinion. However, I will say I think Elden Ring does a great job with the Erd Tree. The art direction in Elden Ring is just fucking unmatched. It doesn't even matter how good or bad the graphics are, as long as you're showing something interesting and you have good art direction, it's beautiful. However, most of the views in Oblivion really have aged very well, and you can still get a great feeling from looking at them when you play the game now. And this leads me into the real reason that I think Oblivion has aged so well, and that's the world that it takes place in. Across the whole of Cyrodiil, this beautiful place that I've just been showing you, there's over 800 named NPCs in all of the large cities, small towns and little villages. All of them have their own name, their own schedule to go by, and their own lines of dialogue that you can speak to them about. You can see a list of every single one of them. Every single person here is unique, they're active, and on top of that you still have a whole bunch of unnamed NPCs like the guards to add flavour. Most areas in the game, no matter how small they are, they have at least one quest associated with them, if not more, and often those quests have an actual impact. For example, the small town of Ayleswell, an irrelevant farming village that can be avoided by all main quests and faction quests. This village has 5 named people with their own dialogue, and when you first meet them they're all invisible and you have to do a quest to solve this problem, and once it's done they'll all be visible again. Another example is Border Watch. There's 8 NPCs here, and it has an associated quest where you summon a plague on the town and it culminates in it raining dogs that are on fire. Oblivion is absolutely full of little things like this that individually can be removed from the game and it makes no difference, whether it's one NPC, the quest, even the entire village. But it's when you add all of these things together that the world is so alive. There is no other single player game that feels so alive that you can actually be a part of that came out before 2010. And honestly, there's not many competitors afterwards. One of them being Skyrim, of course, and then you have The Witcher 3, Baldur's Gate 3, but there really aren't that many that have this scope and this level of detail within such a large scope. With so many other games, even games that are really, really good, the people in them just exist. They stand around in one place, they don't react to the world around them. The NPCs are more like trees, where until the player comes along and they spur out a few lines of either cringe or boring dialogue, they'll just do nothing at all. They normally won't react if you hit them, like in Avowed, and the consequences, if you can hit them, are often very limited, so it's a guardrail for the player. It only makes me sad Oblivion removed the doomed world mechanic from Morrowind, which nicely takes me on to the next point I would like to make, the line between restriction and freedom. In Oblivion you have this huge, beautiful world to take part in and explore. Most games, it's just explore. You're not allowed to take part. You either do what the devs want you to do, or you do nothing at all. As I mentioned, Morrowind does have an edge in this regard, especially with the ability to literally kill anyone, even if they're vital to the plot, whereas Oblivion, they changed it so that they're immortal and they just get knocked out when you smash them over the head with a massive axe 4,000 times. However, you can still be a massive prick who just steals everything you see, and the world responds accordingly. And if you want to save it and go on a nice stress-relieving killing spree of all the innocent people you can see in the street, then You're allowed. Fuck it. In fact, you don't even need to save it. You can just build up a massive fine that you have to pay off at the end, go to jail and lose a whole bunch of skills, or live as a criminal with a massive bounty. So, what about the restrictions? Well, this is a bit of a tricky one, because some restrictions can be a good thing, especially in RPGs. In Skyrim, you can basically just be a god, who is great at everything, a sneaky archer with a two-handed hammer who wears heavy armour that is a burglar mage who makes potions. In a sense, you can kind of do this in Oblivion, but you have to put in a lot more effort, and the game puts barriers to these with the major and minor skills. Although it may be fun in Skyrim to be a god and live out that power fantasy, in these RPG type of games, the interest, the immersion, the memories, and the replayability can come down to the fact that you might be good at some stuff and bad at others. You can play it knowing that in certain challenges they might be hard to you, but easier to other players and different builds, but you'll know that coming up soon there's something that you specialise in. It makes the world feel more relatable and thoughtful, it feels more real. Now, Oblivion doesn't do this as well as other games, as I mentioned before, Morrowind in particular. With Morrowind, it even locks you out of entire questline based on your decision making. You have to pick between two guilds. If you go with one of them, you won't be able to go with the other one. It gives your choices a real impact that, admittedly, it is missing from Oblivion, and it's a shame that they never included that. They should have had, like, with the Mages Guild, you have to go against Necromancers. If they'd have just had even a small little Necromancer subplot that was locked out if you decided to work for the Mages Guild, even if you could do the Necromancer one and then work for the Mages Guild, so it was just a matter of doing them in the right order, that would have been nice. However, I still do think that Oblivion has a good balance between allowing the player a lot of freedom to take part in the world and not feel like they're just a tacked-on addition on rails going through the world, being shown things that they want you to see, but also you are limited to a certain extent, so you can't just fuck things up and take your enjoyment of the game away. Additionally, in Oblivion, you still had spellcrafting, and you absolutely had the freedom to make very silly or very overpowered spells. However, you also had levitating removed. This helped for level design purposes, so the player wasn't free to just levitate and skip dungeons, especially the Oblivion gates. However, you can still make a massive speed spell or a massive jump spell and just jump over entire buildings and run really quick through the dungeons. So again, it's kind of speaks to my point of it being in between those two. It's kind of in the perfect spot, at least for me. And that point goes hand in hand with a very similar reason for Oblivion's greatness, which is that it also exists perfectly in between the lines of overcomplicated and oversimplified. I think part of the appeal of Oblivion, and to some extent Skyrim, which was probably closer to the oversimplified side than Oblivion was, but it's that they exist in that sweet spot of games where they came out after video games were very complicated because they was appealing to the more kind of extreme nerdy side of the population. But it was before they were dumbed down so much that they had to appeal to every single person on the entire planet so they could make a maximum profit. Oblivion in particular, as I mentioned, was right in that sweet spot, and I don't think AAA games will ever get back to it. Earlier I mentioned how great 2006 was for games, but honestly, this whole period of kind of about 2003 to 2010 was just glorious, and I honestly believe it comes down to the target audience. It could just be nostalgia speaking, absolutely could be the case, and technically the point I'm about to make could be applied to any game of this period, not just Oblivion, but bear with me regardless. During this time, the market had opened up, so these games were pretty much aimed at most males between the age of 10 and 50, and within that bracket you would have different games that could be aimed at different types of people. As a kid, I would watch my dad play Morrowind. I was like 6, 7, 8 years old at the time. I couldn't play it myself because I found it either too boring or too complicated. I still enjoyed watching it, whereas with Oblivion, we both loved it. I could play Oblivion as a little kid without it being too complicated or too boring, and my dad could play it without thinking it was a dumbed-down game for kids. And I think this speaks to Oblivion and games of this time in general. It was at a time when the market was opening a little bit, but before the dam broke, and now every single who can dribble onto a controller has to be included in the target audience, which causes games to be watered down. And with Oblivion, even though the game is as large as it knows what it is, and it sticks to that point. You don't even have the option to go build your own town or start sailing around. And you could look at this as a negative, however it does mean that the game is kept sharp and precise, and if you like what you've got, there is a lot of it. The final point I would like to make, and by far the most potent, is a hard one to make, but fundamentally I think it comes down to the passion of the people who were making the game. Earlier I drew attention to the guy who was randomly dumping the undead in a cave when the making of Oblivion. And this might have just seemed something that's a little bit silly, but actually it does show incredible value, and that's that the person making the game, and indeed all the people making the game, had passion for it. And you can see this consistently throughout that video, and it's shown within the game itself. Oblivion was clearly a large passion project by a lot of people, and the details in the game show this, and it's these small details that add to the game. They take it from being something that could have just been fun at the time to something that is still fun now. And in the comparison to Avowed video that I keep going back to, you can see that this level of detail is missed nowadays, and it's the case for a lot of games, not just Avowed. Crobecat does a whole bunch of videos that show similar stuff. It's not like this is a new phenomenon. It shows little things like the way the arrows work, the way that water works. There's a million tiny little things that you could list that show how Oblivion has actually aged very well and is a very well made, well put together game. Better than most that have followed it, and it's the passion from the creators that allowed them to put these details into the game. Why bother with delicate parts of the game when the people leading the company, and in some instances the people who are actually making the game, don't care about the game? It exists to make money anyway. Just get it to tick boxes, you know, it's got this in it, it's got that in it. It looks good when it's listed, its attributes, when IGN say all the stuff it's got in it. It looks good on a trailer, people can go, wow, amazing. And then that's as far as it goes. You get the game, and it's ass. And fundamentally, this is the most important part of this video. Why do people say Oblivion has aged badly, when in reality it's aged well? It's because the surface of video games has become much more polished, while the core of them decays. When you look at Oblivion, and you look at games that we see today, Oblivion does seem ugly and dated, and the newer games look pristine. But if you just scratch away at that surface, underneath the modern game you find rot. Underneath Oblivion, you'll find gold. A world that's made for you to enjoy, not just a world that's made for you to consume. Before the video ends, I want to address the argument that it actually hasn't aged well, modern games just suck so much ass it seems like it has, which honestly is a fair argument, and you can tell by the rest of this video that it's definitely an element of my argument. However, for me at least, I don't think you can judge the past by an alternate dimension where AAA industry continued down that path that it was on in the 2000s. All you can do is compare past to present, what we actually have, and Oblivion is undoubtedly one of the greatest games from one of the greatest periods, and it still has so much to offer almost 20 years after its release. The only place that you can find detail like this is in much smaller titles. There's loads and loads of great games being released nowadays. I just recently played Fly Night, absolutely incredible game, but at the end of the day it's a very small game. You're not going to get grand scale games like that. The only one really is Baldur's Gate 3. The Witcher 4 has the potential to be it, but I don't think it will be, honestly. CD Projekt Red is incredibly bloated at this point. I'm worried about it. I hope it's good, but I'm not so sure it will be. I could say a lot more, but I don't think it's necessary at this point. I think I've made my point. Like and subscribe if you did enjoy. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.